Hey there, folks! Welcome to episode 45 of Funny Book Splatter, a horror comics podcast brought to you by HorrorTalk.com. I am your host, James Ferguson. This week's guest is Frank Martin, the writer of the anthology series Modern Testament. The comic brings creatures and monsters from the Bible into the present day. All 4 issues are currently available digitally on ComiXology and in print at InsaneComics.com. Frank is also a novelist with a number of horror titles under his belt, so lots to check out here. Frank can be found online on Twitter and Instagram at Frank the Writer and on Facebook at facebook.com/FrankMartinWriter. Quick introduction this week. We'll jump right into episode 45 of Funny Book Splatter with my guest, Frank Martin. We'll dive right in to talk about Modern Testament. How would you describe this to someone who came in completely blind?
Completely blind, I would say Modern Testament is a horror anthology that deals with biblical beings in our modern world, a bit of a supernatural feel to it, kind of like Constantine, where all the stories are standalone, so they don't weave together into some grand scheme of things. It kind of focuses on the individual characters, and they try to tell individual stories.
So was the Bible something that you grew up with? Are you like a good Catholic boy, and then this was just something that you wanted to put your own spin on it?
No. I that's really the first question everybody hits me with. I'm more of a mythology guy. You know, growing up in elementary school, I always dug Roman mythology and Egyptian gods and stuff like that. So to me, this was just kind of an extension of that. With the angels and the demons, there's always a mythological aspect to it, not necessarily hardened into any scripture.
Okay. So is this, I guess this is your take of those kind of mythology pieces. Would you be interested in doing something similar with like other aspects of mythology, whether like the Greek and Roman myths, like what you mentioned?
I would. I mean, there's only so much you can do with it, and these characters or gods, what have you, have been around forever. So everybody's kind of put their own spin on it. If I wanted to do something, I would want to do something completely new and unique and put its own twist on it. And I felt with Modern Testament, that's kind of what I was going for by grounding the characters and isolating them, just talking about the characters themselves rather than the plot that they would be involved in. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, I think so, because you're bringing these characters into the modern day, but also kind of putting them into real life issues. Not issues in terms of comic book sense, obviously, but kind of showing them in not. You know, when you look at the Bible, you see things like, okay, well, this guy's, they're living in huts or walking 1,000,000 miles to get someplace, but now it's like, all right, well, you can't really relate to something like that. When you put them into this current world, and it changes your frame of reference a bit.
I'm not really in the slightest the first person to do that either. There's been tons of people before me that have taken angels, demons, and all these other characters and put them in a modern world, but I really wanted to pull on that string and talk about the connection of these characters in the modern world rather than just using the modern world as a backdrop.
Yeah, and I think you accomplished that because you set it out in terms of kind of certain situations that would, like, I'm thinking of the most recent issue, the volume 4, where you have things like God and the devil, but putting them in very different situations than what we're used to seeing these characters in, that provide a more a deeper connection to them than what we're used to.
Yeah, I mean, the characters themselves are fairly common. Everybody's familiar with them, so it worked in my favor in the way that I didn't really have to provide a whole lot of backdrop.
Yeah.
I can use that as a foundation and assume that the reader has a little bit of more knowledge going into it rather than just a brand new character. And then I could really focus on putting in a new setting and seeing how this character that they're so familiar with would interact and react in this new setting rather than the same old, same old.
Yeah, it's funny. I've found that similar I don't know what to call it, a difficulty, but I also write comic reviews for ComiCon.com, and I realized I'm used to writing reviews in a certain way for Horror Talk that I have to like rehash this, like what's happened so far in a story, because not everyone has read the latest issue of like The Walking Dead or something. I don't really have to do that for like Superman, you know, like everyone kind of knows who Superman is. I don't have to go like, well, he was the last son of a dying planet when his father sent him in a spaceship. Like, I don't have to go into those details.
I love in the beginning of like Spider-Man when they always have that thing. Peter Parker was an average boy until he got bitten by a radioactive spider and got spider powers. Who I don't think anybody has ever read that in a Spider-Man comic ever.
Yeah,
it's always there at the
Yeah.
beginning of the
Yeah, but yeah, we're still gonna get that in every other Spider-Man reboot, it seems. Although the latest one they managed to skip that, so not so much the death of Thomas and Martha Wayne. Those poor parents just always gunned down in every other movie they've ever appeared in.
flashbacks.
Yeah. So how did you get this project together? Anthologies can be a very intimidating project, especially one that's helmed by one person. There's only a handful of other ones that kind of come to mind that are kind of all written and steered by one person. Usually you have a number of different writers and artists working together with telling like a theme. So how did you get this project together?
This was it kind of just developed out of being pragmatic with what I had available to me, because this was my first foray into comics, and rather than start out with a huge series, I wanted to practice writing shorts. So at the end of the day, I wrote scripts, short story scripts, and I'm left with a whole bunch of them, and I'm like, well, what am I really going to do with these? Because you can't just make the comic and then hope some anthology comes around that I can include it in. So
Yeah.
I was like, why don't I just put them together myself and carry it forward? So it wasn't really, the chicken kind of came before the egg in that I had the comics and then I put them together rather than coming up the idea and then deciding that I wanted to make it, you know?
So were you getting them illustrated as well, or did you just have the scripts at that point?
It started off with one script. I wrote it based on a comic, like an online workshop that I had in script writing. And at the end, they said, at the end of the course, you'll have a completed comic script. I'm like, okay, great. What am I supposed to do with this? So I ended up, I said, okay, I could find an artist for it, but then I'm just going to have a finished short. And I'm like, why don't I just write two more and put them in a book? And then I had a one shot, and then I published it. And the publisher said, do you want to continue it? And I said, sure. So it kind of like every step of the way, it just kind of built upon itself until it became an entire series.
I like how you just use the word pragmatic. First of all, like you focused on what you can accomplish. You have to start small in this business. To go out and say, well, I want to write a 60 issue like opus. Like that's I'm sure you could get to that sooner or later, but you got to start small, and especially if this is like your first project.
One of the great story that I like to tell all the time is how they came about with the movie Saw, the horror movie. I don't know how long it's been, 15 years ago maybe.
Yeah.
The first one came out, and I was really into how they made the movie. They said, look, we got no money, we want to make a movie, what should we do? Well, how about we have two guys in a room and they just can't leave the room? That will make it very cheap to shoot. And they're like, well, why can't they leave the room? Well, how about they're changing it? Why are they changing it? And they kind of use their limitations to build a story off of, and I thought that was very cool, and I kind of try to think that way in every project that I do.
Yeah, no, it's a great way to do it. I mean, that was Robert Rodriguez's method when he made El Mariachi too, because it was like, well, what do I have? I have a guitar case, a turtle, and an old bus, and
I'm good to go.
Yeah, that was it. Like, and he was able to make the movie because he worked around what he had, and I think more creative folks may be more successful when they take a look at their surroundings and just go, all right, what can I actually do? And as a writer, I think you have the luxury of like, yeah, like I have time, like you could write stuff on your phone, you could just kind of jot down notes here and there and slowly put something together in free time over the course of X amount of however long, whether it's days, weeks, months, even years. So yeah, and then
when I'm talking to new creators, they always want to jump for the they always want to go for the stars with the very first thing out of the gate. Oh, let's create this huge epic. And I'm like, no, you should kind of tailor back and build up to that, your skill level and your confidence and your experience and your connections. And I was the same way. I was like, I got this 6-issue series. It's going to be amazing. And and the first Modern Testament issue, I had an editor, and he said, you're out of your mind. It's not the way to go about it. So I kind of make the same mistakes, and I'm glad to kind of pass that experience on to other people and to tailor them and kind of bring back their expectations to try to take one step at a time.
Yeah, and it's not like discouraging creativity or anything. It's just trying to manage expectations and making sure that no one gets in over their head, because
it's being practical.
Yeah, I mean, how many series have you started and then they never finished, or they got lost along the way or something? And it's like, yeah, if you want to get to that point, you have to be able to complete it. And I'm sure there are folks that are able to accomplish that, but you have to be able to have a frame of reference there if you're going to attempt to get there. And you need to take those baby steps together. Maybe like webcomics is the way to start for something like that, or you're not having like a huge commitment right there.
A lot of people. So I saw something online the other day. I follow Matt Hawkins on Facebook.
Yeah.
And he had made a post that he was at a comic convention, and the guy brought over his portfolio, and the guy Matt was like, he made a post about it because it kind of stuck with him. He said, yeah, this is some good stuff. And the guy said, I really want to accomplish this. I want to quit my job and dedicate full time to this. And my family's behind me, and I need you to tell me whether or not you think I got the stuff. And he posted and said, I've only told people this maybe 2 times in the history of my career that it's not going to happen, because people think that I'm going to dive into the world of comics and I'm going to make something and I'm going to be publishing with Marvel within 6 months, and it doesn't really work like that. Or they make an indie book and they say, I'm going to submit it to Image, and they're gonna publish it. No, it doesn't. You can't start at Image. Yeah. You got to be on the top and then you go to Image.
Yeah, unless you're like a screenwriter or something like that, an accomplished screenwriter at that. You're not just going to pop into Image and expect them to publish your first book.
You have to be people that transfer over from comics from other avenues usually have a big name. For instance, I've been reading the Man-Thing that was written by R.L. Stein.
Yeah.
R.L. Stein is huge in the world of writing
Goosebump books. Yeah,
adult horror. So I think that was his first comic, but he's allowed to do that. He's R.L. Stein.
Yeah, he paid his dues elsewhere, and he earned the luxury of going like, hey, can I write a comic? And then someone was able to go, yeah, go ahead. Here you go. You want Man-Thing? Go for it. Like, when was the last time anyone seriously cared about Man-Thing? You know?
I love Man-Thing.
Yeah, but like when you're thinking of like favorite characters, are you going through and like, oh man, Man-Thing?
I kind of root for the underdog. If I were to write for the big two, and they just said, you can have any characters you want, what are you going to do? I don't want to. I mean, I love Spider-Man, I love Batman, I love the big guys, but at the same time, there's something cool about taking an underdog that people are aware of but don't really think about all too much and putting them on the main stage. I kind of dig that idea. So yeah, I think I like Man-Thing.
Yeah, no, I understand. I mean, look, that was how I had first got acquainted with like Iron Fist, for example, was when Ed Brubaker and Matt Fraction started writing him, and like I had never really heard much about that character at all, and then I gave it a chance, and then it quickly became one of my favorite books that Marvel was publishing at the time.
Yeah, I think the same thing happened with me with Vision. They just had the great Vision series with Tom King.
Oh yeah, I haven't read that yet. I heard nothing but great things about it though.
It was really, really good. It was probably, when it was being published, the best book Marvel had out.
Wow.
But it's like nothing else they had out. And I'm like, I don't really like Vision, and I didn't really know who Tom King was at the time. I'm like, I don't know why I'm good. To be honest with you, I like the cover, so I was like, I'll buy the cover. And I'm like, whoa, I got to keep reading this thing. So it was very cool to see a character that I was familiar with, that I really didn't have too much experience on, to read a series that was dedicated to him that I really dug.
Yeah, it's funny how one good series can really change the way you see an entire character and like elevate them to that status.
I think likewise, if you weren't familiar with the character and you said I'd give him a shot and it tanked, it would kind of tarnish your...
Yeah, it could go either way, definitely. So, we talked about modern day superheroes and whatnot, but what about horror? So was the going back to that as a genre, was that something you were always into growing up?
I was a huge horror fan, but not so much a horror comic fan. I didn't. I mean, I would read them every once in a while, but I never really did them as much as I did horror movies.
Hmm.
I read a little bit of horror, but I was a big horror movie guy.
Yeah,
I grew up. I was kind of coming of age in the early '90s, and I
I've
had an older sister,
sorry, go ahead.
so I would say in the '90s is when they were in the sequel craze of all the Halloweens,
Yeah.
Halloween 20 and Nightmare on Elm Street 16, and so I got caught up into that. So that was my big horror experience, was through the horror slash movie.
Yeah, I found that people have fond memories of like certain superhero comics growing up, but or like this was Frank Miller's Daredevil changed my life, or Peter David's run on X Factor or something. But it's doesn't seem to be the same translation with horror comics. I mean, there are some rare exceptions, but I feel that for the most part, it's I was into them, or I read a lot. I read a handful of like old EC comics or Tales from the Crypt or something, but it doesn't have the same specific. So no one's going to say, "Oh, Amazing Spider-Man number 150 changed my life. This was it." I don't know why that is, or maybe they just don't. There aren't as many that like stuck out to that extent, or it was more of just like the feeling of horror comics in general. I think that's changed in the past like 10 years or so. I think because there's a lot of like really great books out there that are changing the market, and that could be partially due to The Walking Dead.
I think it's a shift in markets and what people are into, and maybe Walking Dead had a factor into it. But looking back when I was reading comics when I was in high school, I don't really remember a real horror line or characters or series that were dedicated to horror. And now I'm thinking of stuff that I'm reading, and they're not straight horror, but they do have horror touches to them.
Mm-hmm.
Like the Vision series I was talking about, there is a little flair of horror there, and I think that might be a change in the market, change in dynamic in what people are interested in, kind of seeping into the mainstream. So while they're not outright horror books, they do have elements to it. And thinking just off the top of my head, I mean, I didn't read it when it was first published, but I read the graphic novels when they became trades. Was Alan Moore's huge Swamp Thing run?
Yeah,
was a great horror series that probably influenced me later on, not when it was first released.
Yeah, it's funny. Like there are elements in superhero comics, and this dates back forever. I mean, with characters like Swamp Thing or Man Thing that play with horror, or even like some of the villains and stuff. Like when you think about it, a character like the Green Goblin or Doctor Octopus can be really freaking terrifying. It's like Doctor Octopus is a dude that has metal fused to his body. Because of a horrific accident, that's the beginning of a horror story. So I feel like those just kind of get glossed away, but there are elements of horror in almost every superhero comic in some way, and I think the big two tend to kind of play with those toys a little bit, and pull those levers when they need to, but not to the extent where it's like full on horror. They can do scary things or maybe use some of the tropes of the genre, but not to the full extent.
Yeah, I think, again, going back to the change in markets, when Green Goblin and Doc Ock were first created, it was a completely different type of comic book that we're reading. And as time goes on and writers were given more leeway into the kind of stories they could tell, they can revisit that Dr. Octopus character and say, you know what, I really want to flesh this out, this idea. And that's kind of what we're seeing today, the people trying to give new spins and new takes on different types of old characters that have elements to them. For instance, Venom. Venom's a horrific character.
Yeah, he is a monster.
I've read a great Venom story. I forget who wrote it, but it was Venom Dark Origins, and it was basically really expanding upon Venom's origin story.
Mm-hmm.
And it was 5 issues, and it stuck with me. It's one of the series that I remember of it, and it was pretty horrific. And I really enjoyed it. So there's definitely characters out there in the mainstream that are horror-esque, that you really don't think about it because they're in a world of people in tights that are flying around.
Yeah, it's funny how those kind of get glossed over to such a but Venom is a perfect example. That is terrifying. Like if you saw that character in real life, like that's just like no, forget a boogeyman or anything else, but like that's a monster. That is that is a real life monster that's terrifying.
I think even more so than Carnage. Carnage is like Carnage is kind of the same thing, and he's a serial killer. But when you think of a serial killer, it's all right. He's a serial killer. We're done. But when you think of Venom, there's a whole bunch of psychological horror that goes into the character of Eddie Brock and why he is the way he is. And I think he's a little bit more monstrous.
Yeah, he's definitely exhibited those traits more. Like I think Carnage represented more about chaos and stuff, whereas like Venom was like if he wanted to or if he could be in control of that. But there's this seething kind of rage just under the surface that if he loses control for just an instant, he's biting people's heads off or something.
He's the greatest type of bad guy, the bad guy that thinks he's a good guy.
Yeah, that's what makes a great villain.
He always thought Spider-Man was the bane of his existence.
Mm-hmm. So shifting back to Modern Testament for a minute. So how did you go about finding the different artists for a project like this?
The internet is a great thing. That's pretty much it. Finding indie comic websites and postings and networking through Facebook, and I found a whole bunch of people. I mean, it's as simple as having writer friends and posting their work and then seeing who the artist was, and I said, you know what, his style would be great for this story. And then I contact him and I say, hey, are you available to do something? It's kind of just things kind of fall into your lap the more you're active. If you just kind of sit back and hope things are going to happen, it really doesn't work out too well.
Yeah, I'm continually amazed by how easy collaboration has become as a result of the internet. You could build a comic with someone on the complete other side of the world and never meet them, never like talk to them outside of just sometimes even just email correspondence, and you guys can create something together. So it's pretty awesome.
I think the benefits of the internet have far outweighed the negatives, because at the same token, there's so much connectiveness. Is that even a word?
Yeah, we'll take it.
The internet, that sometimes you get drowned in how much material people have out there. You're just like, wow, there's so much that I'm never gonna be able to check it all out. And you really just become it's nice being so connected, but at the same time, you're such a small fish in a huge ocean. It can become overwhelming.
Yeah, I see that with my never-ending review pile of books. It's just like, oh yeah, I'll get to these eventually, or hopefully I'll get the next issue, but doesn't seem to slow down at any stretch. Now, so you mentioned before that you took a course. Was it the Comics Experience course by any chance?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I mean, it was a long time ago. I really don't remember.
I was just curious because I've heard good things about that course too. So now,
I think I wanted to take Comic Experience to learn how to letter.
Mm-hmm.
I think I want to kind of delve into lettering, and because it's one of those ways I can control my own comics and how they tie each other together, that I think it will go a long way. So I've heard good things about their lettering course, so that's been on the table for me.
Yeah, that was one of my questions. Was going to say, well, I think the silly comic book question is like, all right, you finished this project, but what's next? What else do you have coming down the pipeline? Because I feel like it's comics journalism is a bit of, well, what have you done for us lately, kind of thing.
You're only as good as your last comic.
Yeah.
So I got, I think, 2 series that are closest to release are a series called Werewriter that's going to be published by Ping Streams Publishing, and it's kind of a story of a guy who's cursed as a werewolf, and he's kind of a beacon for the supernatural. So he travels around with a companion who's a girl who's a witch, and he has to try to find. He's searching for the cure to his curse. And over time, all these supernatural beings that he interacts with, he kind of makes a living by writing short stories that are published about it. So that's where the werewriter aspect comes into it.
That sounds great. What is that going to be another anthology series, or is this
that's
more standard?
Kind of an ongoing series with arcs and one shots in between, but it's going to be a continuing narrative structure.
That sounds really great.
It's going to be. It's kind of like a supernatural, the show kind of format to it, where they're traveling around and they interact with different supernatural beings, but at the same time, there's an overarching narrative that ties the story together.
Those I found are the best kind. So you kind of mix the monster of the week element with with an overarching story that you kind of drop little tidbits for the overlying narrative, like the big bad kind of element.
Absolutely. So I got that, and then I have a good old pirate story that's probably coming out sometime next year. That should be a 4-part miniseries, and it's kind of a Pirates of the Caribbean feel to it.
Yeah, you can't go wrong with pirates. Do you have a particular story? I know this might be like choosing your favorite child, but of the Modern Testament run, you had a number of different characters, a number of different stories involved. Do you have one that stands out as one of your favorites?
I really dug in Volume 1 the second story, which is the demon story, and it's called The Bad Guy, and it's a very straightforward plot to it. Demon breaks into a house, possesses a girl. The parents call the priest, and then they have to exorcise the demon. So the plot is very straightforward, but the story is told through the demon's perspective. So he has a whole reason for doing it, and he's trying to. The story is called The Bad Guy. So he kind of takes the stance that, look, I'm a bad guy. I have to do this. It's who I am. But there's a reason I do it, and he kind of goes into and explains the reason. And he's kind of a sarcastic, and he's got a little bit of a wit, and it was very fun to write. So I always enjoy reading that story.
Do you go back and read your own work like that? Are you able to do that? I know there's some creators that are like, no, I can't. Well, after it's out there, I can't go back and read my own stuff.
I do. I'm a vain comic creator. I love it. Because at the end of the day, you're only going to write something or create something that you would enjoy yourself. Yeah. So I'm not going to make something that I'm like, yeah, I finished it, but it sucks. So I'm just going to kind of look at it again.
No, I understand. I hosted a radio show in college, aptly titled "Too Fast, Too Ferguson," and I would tape it and then listen to it in my car during the like throughout the week. And then I found that I got better as a result, because I would listen to the mic breaks and go, oh, that should have been fast, like that should have been tighter. I should have said this or should have said that. And then plus all the music I picked, I liked. So I'm like, yeah, of course. Like, this is better than some of the shit that's on the radio, so why not? But there would inevitably be times where, like, someone else would get in the car, and then the mic break would come on and go, is that you? And I'm like, fuck yeah, it was me on the radio. Like, if you had a tape of yourself, wouldn't you listen to it too? So maybe I was a little too condescending at that point.
You point out something very important about being a creator, is that when you go back and you look at your stuff and you want to enjoy it, but at the same time you notice every single little error that there is that nobody else would notice, and you're like, this can of soda was a different color in the other panel, but nobody else is ever going to notice that but you. So you want to read your stuff, but then you end up torturing yourself.
Yeah, I found, like, in that example, like, all right, like, that was out there in the ether, but I can get it next time. But I think in those, like, yeah, I guess there's only so many drafts you can make in a comic before it's like, all right, this has to go out there in the world. Although if you're someone like George Lucas, like, you could keep taking other bites of the apple, I guess. Mm-hmm. But if it's something like continuity, that kind of is what it is. But if you're looking at it and saying, oh, well, this dialogue could be a little bit tighter, or this sequence could have been shortened, or I wish I didn't put this here, like, I feel like that can help anyone grow as a writer.
Yeah, there's a great quote that, I don't know if he said it, but it's attributed to Da Vinci, that he says, art is never finished, only abandoned. Yeah. And that's kind of true. If you wanted to, you can look at whether you write a novel or you draw a painting or whatever, you can tweak and tweak and tweak and tweak and tweak and tweak and tweak, but at some time you got to say goodbye.
Mm-hmm. You got to put it out there in the world.
For better or worse.
Now that you've made 4 volumes of Modern Testament, was that the 4th and final volume?
That will be the 4th and final volume. When I made the decision to carry over the title after the first one shot, I was only ever going to do 4. Mm-hmm. And there's a couple reasons for that. Number one is because I wanted to feature a horseman of the apocalypse in every one, and there's 4 horsemen, so I was like, yeah, perfect.
There you go. Nice touch. Fits in with the whole biblical thing.
And I wanted to put a cap on it because at some point you got to move on, and I didn't want to be doing it forever, and I wanted to have an end in sight. So I thought 4 was a good number, and it also makes when I collect them into a trade, it's going to make it more feasible and a nice, good package. So I'm looking forward to that too.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. Do you have plans for a collection of them?
Yeah, what I'm end up going to be doing is, so I've also released 2 shorts that were digital downloads for Free Comic Book Day. Those will be included in the trade for the first, so they're going to be for the first time in print, and also there will be 1 exclusive story just for the trade. So it's not like if you own 4 volumes,
yeah,
you have no reason to pick up the trade. There will be extra stuff in there.
That's great, and I really like how you structured it then with having a different horseman in every book. Like that's really smart and a nice touch that ties everything kind of all together. It's a nice continuity for everything.
So yeah, it actually gets kind of strange because in the very first volume, Famine was featured as the horseman, but there are little guest appearances by the other 3. So when I was going to the second volume, I had the option or the choice to either use those, I wouldn't say versions of the Horseman and carry them through the other 4 volumes, or should I consider every story completely standalone and start fresh with each Horseman, which is what I ended up doing. Mm-hmm. So that was, I did have fun with the Horseman, especially the last one in volume 4, because Death is such, even more than God and the Devil, Death is a character that's appeared so many times. So I really kind of hit my head against the wall. I said, I got to do something new. And it's like, well, he's always depicted as a skeleton. Why don't I go in the other direction and make him completely fat?
Yeah, I like that touch with it. It's just like, he's just stuck. Like, well, this is my life now. I don't really. This is the world I live in, I guess.
Well, that was a lot of fun, is developing these stories. Especially in volume 4, because I wanted to do something new, do something different for these characters that people have seen so many times. So I got to put myself in their shoes. I said, okay, my name is Death. This is my job. I've been doing it for so long. How would I feel? And then that's kind of how I developed the stories. I tried to put myself in their shoes and develop their character that way.
Mm-hmm. That's what I think I liked so much about this book, was that you put these kind of new spins on it. Like, it's one thing to say, okay, well, here's an angel, and yeah, okay, he's really holy, or here's a devil, and is he really evil, whatever, or he goes down to Georgia, or whatever. But you have these unique spins on it, especially in the 4th volume. Like, I love the story with the devil and God, because you kind of flipped them in their usual. Yeah. So, like, you're used to God being this, omnipresent, all holy guy, and he wasn't really, all holy. He wasn't a great person in this. And same thing with the devil. It was just like, well, yeah, he's evil, but he's more like a businessman in this. And it was really, smart setup for both.
I always was very interested in the devil as a character. Forget the spiritual and supernatural aspect of it, but he's kind of, his story is told by his enemy. If you think about it, if the Bible is the word of God and the only kind of knowledge we have of him is what God says, I mean, what is he going to do? He's going to prop the guy up and make him look like kind of a decent fella? No, he's going to tell him he's the devil and he's a bad dude. Mm-hmm. So I kind of always like to take a new approach to him, to say, look, if let's give him a fair shake.
Give the devil his due, if you will.
Exactly.
Now, how did you land with the Insane Comics imprint? How did that come about?
So when I finished the first volume, I finished it completely cover to cover, and then I went out searching for publishers. And I was looking for really indie guys, somebody, because anthology is really, it's a tough market. So you had to find somebody who was willing to take a chance on me. And I got a lot of no's. I got a couple yeses. And I looked into Insane and James Munch, the publisher over there. And he was really driven to build his brand, and he hadn't released any comics for Insane at the time, so he was really looking to start off with his first line, and he dug the book, and I went with him, and the first releases of books he had, I believe it was 2 years ago, he released them on Free Comic Book Day. It was when the first books came out, and Modern Testament was one of them. And I'm really happy with the choice I made, because he's just been growing ever since. And I had the opportunity to go to Chicago and meet with him at C2E2. They had a booth. I had a blast. So I'm really happy with the home that Modern Testament had for the past 2 years now.
It's great. It's funny how these things just all work out. That they all just kind of line up with this kind of stuff sometimes.
Sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't, and you can't really look too much. I saw you can't really you make 0% of the shots you don't take.
Yeah.
So it's good to go out there and to give it a shot, and when they work out, it feels like it was fate, but really you were just really pushing for it all along.
Yeah, and look, in this day and age, even if you didn't land with a publisher, there's still options for you to get your book out there, whether it's something like Kickstarter, ComiXology Submit, even Patreon. There's a lot of different ways to get a comic out there now.
There's a lot of opportunities and a lot of avenues and venues for creators to become successful. So I kind of read something about people that were looking to break into the big two, become writers or artists for Marvel or DC. And somebody said, look, any of these superstars can tell you how they did it. But at the end of the day, everybody has to pave their own path. There's no one right way to do it. So everybody has their own story and everybody has their own way that they did it. And at the end of the day, you can take what they did as inspiration, but you got to really find your own way.
Yeah, it's and plus there's that joke of every time someone figures out a way to break into comics, that way gets closed down and no one else can ever get in that way.
I've heard that before.
But the only real way to do that is just make comics. I found that every other writer that I've spoken to or just seen online or whatever, anytime they ask, it's there's no secret. It's just write and then just make the comic. You can't. That's your resume. And I saw it just on Twitter the other day. I forgot who it was, but they said oh, if I'm a writer, I don't have a portfolio. Well, make a comic. You make a comic. That's a portfolio. That's an example of your work, because you actually have something and not just talking about it or just throwing a script down. Because if you show that you can actually get something done and created, that's going to be a million times better than just saying oh, well, I want to write, or I wrote a script once. You need to get that out there. Yeah,
so I've heard people say that the number one attribute of a writer is reliability, being able to sit down and write your scripts consistently and deliver them on time. I mean, it might seem like a simple thing, but until you sit down and try to write 22 pages of comic book script, it's a very difficult thing to do. And I know a lot of these writers work on multiple titles, and I envy them for being able to grind them out on a consistent basis.
Yeah, and a lot of that has to be just dedication. If that is your job, you have to treat it as such. To make the time for it, structure it that you can actually get these things done consistently and on a regular basis. I know, when I write, whether it's writing reviews or trying to bang out a script, it's something that I have to make the time for it and be disciplined. So okay, this is the time I'm going to do this. If it's during lunch break during my day job, or if I'm carving out time, after the kids go to bed, whatever, it's okay, this is when I can actually make this.
One thing that I learned, there's a different mindset between a comic reader and a comic creator. So when you're a comic reader, I would say if I'm reading a comic slowly, it takes me about 15 minutes to pound through it. So, but until you sit down and you try to just a single issue, 22 pages. And until you sit down and try to create a single issue that's 22 pages, you don't realize how much content is really in there, how much story really you have to come up with in order to fill those 22 pages, because it takes you such a short amount of time to read it that you don't even realize how much interactions you have to come up with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think I'm of the mind that comics are a study in efficiency, So the images and the text need to work together to tell the story, and one should not be doing what the other one's already doing. So I've found that a mistake that gets made often in indie creators, it's getting better now, but in indie writers or folks that are coming from the prose world, like prose meaning like novel writers, they tend to overwrite and not allow their artists to really do the job. So if like I'm thinking of like I can go to a specific example. I'm not going to name it here, but like here's like a panel of a guy punching another person, and it says he punched him as hard as he could. It's like, well, I know that because I see the image of him punching this guy as hard as he can. So you don't have to tell me that. Tell me what he's thinking or why he's punching them, or give me any other, like, you don't need to fill that up with a lot of dialogue or narration because the image is there to tell that story. So I think when there's no text, when you can tell the story just with the images, I think that's incredibly powerful and can be really moving. But I'm sure it's also very difficult to do. So it's like that's like an expert level accomplishment.
Yeah, so I don't write too many screenplays now. I think when I really first started taking writing seriously, I wrote a whole bunch of screenplays, and I currently write novels, and I write comics as well, obviously. So it's really interesting, the writing, I would say, approach that you take that differs between the three. And you're exactly right in that when you create a comic book, there's certain information that just doesn't need to be in the script. You're kind of bogging down your artist, or you're confusing them. And they need to know very specific things, and there's a balance between providing too much information and not providing enough. Because at the same time, people just write something that would be, the guy gets punched in the face. But like, oh, okay. I mean, but if you're just going to let your artist do whatever he wants, then in the very next panel, you can't be mad when he does something that you weren't planning. You need to tell them what's going to happen so that they can draw the panel accordingly. So there's a real art to comic book writing, and there's a reason that all these superstars like to make how-to comic book writing books, because there's a lot more into it than what people realize.
Yeah, and look, I think that there's certainly a market for it, without a doubt, and it's something that everyone seems to be interested in it, but like you have to actually take the time and do the work and get it out there. You sound like a very motivated person, and I like that. I love having conversations with folks on this show that I then get motivated and inspired by to in turn, and then go out and like, well, shit, I have to go out and write this stuff. I have to go out and do this too. Like, if he could do it, so can I.
Let's end this podcast right now. I gotta get busy.
I gotta go. So anyway, good night, folks. No, but it's true. Like, I think like that, and I think that comes out a lot in this medium, because people are like, it's something, it's a labor of love, and no one's going here to just quit their job and making comics. It's something that you're doing it because you love this medium, and this is how you've chosen to tell a story.
I think that's one of the things that make comics so cool, is that people that become successful in the comic industry understand that. They never forget that notion. So every single people, even the biggest stars in the comic world, are approachable to up and coming or new creators, because they understand the pain, and they feel it, and they remember it. And it's really cool to reach out to people and to say, look, I need help with so and so, and they actually give you the time of day. So it's a really cool way, the way the community sticks together, and because they understand each other.
Yeah, because they were all there at one point too. So it's easy to look back on and go like, yeah, like I remember when I was at that point, and these are a couple things that I did, but it may not be the same for you.
As opposed to, let's say, because like I said, I write prose, as opposed to people that write novels. I mean, if you're a best-selling New York Times author, you can't message this person or send them an email and ask for their advice or ask for their endorsement. I mean, maybe they might give you the time of day, but more often than not, they're going to say, yes, submit something through my agent.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned, so you've written prose and comics and screenplays. Why Modern Testament in a comic book form versus one of those other mediums?
I haven't really thought about it too much, to be honest with you. Like I said, I made the The original short was the very first story, which was the Angel story, and that was based on the comic writing class. So the first one came out with the first one came out of the comics because of a class. So the rest just kind of followed in place. It wasn't like I had a story in mind and I said, what's the best medium for this? I mean, I might do that now, but at the time, like it was like the chicken came before the egg. Like I had the comic, so the rest just kind of fell into line.
Yeah, no, I'm just curious because I know I've spoken to a handful of folks that do work in other ones, and it's something like some are, maybe a screenplay that didn't come together, and you're like, you know what, I could repurpose this and turn this into a comic book, or there's all these other possibilities. But in some cases, you could just have it and say, well, no, this has always been a comic, and this is just how we envisioned it.
Yeah, being visual mediums, there's something between film and comics that is more, I would say, is more easily transferable than from a novel. But a lot of times also it just comes out of collaboration or work between a writer and artist. When I want to work with an artist and we don't have an idea yet, I would oftentimes say to them, look, what are you into? Mm-hmm. And they would tell me what they want to write, or want to draw, and what genres they're into. And sometimes the story will be built off that. So it's not like I have the idea and I would think, would this work best as a comic? Be like, we want to make a comic and we want to collaborate, so let's put our heads together and see what we can come up with together that would be the best fit.
Yeah, and oftentimes that creates the best kind of story because you're really working together in everyone's best interest.
Yeah, if I'm working with an artist, the last thing I want to do is make them draw a script or a story that they're like, oh, I can't. Why do I got to go through this panel now? I want them to be excited for it and to want to do it.
Yeah, no one wants to do work. I mean, that's the whole point of this. Like, if you're making comics, you're doing it because you want to, and you don't want to be in a situation where, like, well, this is garbage. I don't want to do this at all. It's not your day job. It's something you really want to do. Well, look, Frank, this was a total blast. I'm so glad we got a chance to speak. To wrap this up, where are the best places that people can find you and Modern Testament?
So I'm on Instagram and Twitter. My handle is @FrankTheWriter. A good place to follow all my work because I post updates is my author page on Facebook, which would be facebook.com/FrankMartinWriter. And to get Modern Testament, the best place to probably get it is the Insane Comics website. It should be insanecomics.com. And then you could go to the store and you find Modern Testament and see all the goodies that are there.
Sounds good. So we'll link all those up in the show notes. Whenever you get around to doing the collection of that, please keep us posted as well. So I'll be sure to link that up on Horror Talk too, and definitely keep me posted on your new project because that sounds like something that's right up our alley here too.
Yeah, it's a little bit. I like it because it's not. It's horror, but it's horror light. It's geared a little bit towards I wouldn't say a younger audience. But it's not as bloody and it's not as gory, so it deals with elements of horror, obviously, werewolves and other supernatural beings, but it's not meant to drive up the gore factor, which is nice because I've been at Comic-Cons, and Modern Testament is really the only comic that I have out now, and I have 2 other horror novels out, and those 2 are not really for kids, so I see a nice family of 4 walking by, and I'm like, yeah, just keep on walking. Right now.
Maybe when you're older, kids. Well, that's what I is one of the beauties of the horror genre is that it is so versatile. You can have horror for kids or horror for anybody, and there are places for total gore fests, and there's places for kids comics and stuff. Like one of my kids' favorite books right now is this indie book that called Spooky Sleepover, and it's like 3 different stories. There's like a little werewolf one about this hungry werewolf that just wants to eat pizza, and there's one about a haunted toilet, and he just loves it. Like he just eats it up because he's like, oh, like, yeah, I want to read the one about the toilet again. It's like, this is crazy. I think it might have put him off of potty training for like a little bit longer than we probably anticipated, but he loves the comic and he loves reading it, so yeah, I'll go with it.
What just came out? The Justice League Dark DC animated movie just came out. And that was a great horror. Justice League Dark is a great title, and they had Batman in it. And there's a poop monster.
What is this, Dogma?
I think, yeah, I know. It's like Batman fights a poop monster, and I watched it with my son, and he's like, "This is awesome."
Does he do this all the time? Is this a regular event for Batman?
I remember when they came out with that. They're like, "Yeah, let's just throw Batman in there. Why not? Throw Batman in everything." But
Batman's got to fight a poop monster with this one. I do wonder now because like Warner Brothers has been close with Kevin Smith over the years, so I do wonder if someone snuck in a poop monster and was just like, "Yeah, man, like I like Dogma too."
Just go for it.
Yeah, I'm curious if anyone noticed that, or if it was just like, yeah, no, that's in canon. That's fine. Batman's gonna fight this poop monster in issue number whatever. Yeah. All right. On that note, this has been Funny Book Splatter. I have been James Ferguson with my guest Frank Martin. You've been listening to Funny Book Splatter, a horror comics podcast brought to you by HorrorTalk.com. We've been bringing you the best in horror since 2002. In addition to comics, we cover movies, TV shows, books, and video games. We've got news, reviews, guest features, interviews, unboxing videos, and much more. Be sure to sign up to Steve's Deals newsletter to increase your horror collection without breaking the bank. Check us out at HorrorTalk.com and at HorrorTalk on Twitter.